So I want to go ahead and talk to you about a case that you should be able to treat immediately in your practice tomorrow. So this patient comes in and she's broken off her 1-1 and she wants an implant because it's broken. The treating dentist looks at her bite though and realizes that she's biting right up into not quite into the palate, but almost in the palate. But I will go ahead and show you some interesting things that we did in this case that play in with the keys that we talked about before in terms of getting these teeth in the right spot. And then this patient goes ahead, they get their implant done. So here's what it looks like once the implant is complete.
My name is Chris Cito. I'm the Chief Growth Officer and General Manager at Clearly Aligned and Clearly Select. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight's Invisalign Demystified webinar series, Dr. Stephen Schalk. Dr. Schalk graduated from the University of Alberta, DDS, in 2014. Rather than pursue a orthodontic residency, Dr. Schalk decided to travel across the world, Americas, Europe, Asia, to learn orthodontics from some of the top orthodontic experts across the globe. After limiting his practice to orthodontics, he became the youngest Invisalign diamond provider in the world. Dr. Schalk is currently a Diamond Plus top 1% Invisalign provider. He's the owner of 3 dental practices and the founder of Clearly Aligned, as well as Clearly Select, our Invisalign growth network. He speaks internationally and is an industry key opinion leader, has presented at the 2023 Invisalign Summit, as well as continually provides continuing education across North America. He researches digital monitoring of clear aligners with the SHRED program, and previously served as on the board as a member of the Academy of Clear Aligners. In 2020, Dr. Schalk created Clearly Aligned, an orthodontic education platform for general dentists. He's a natural speaker. He's an enthusiastic educator, as you guys will see, and his passion is sure to inspire and encourage many of you to continue on your road to success with Invisalign. So on that, I will pass it over to Dr. Stephen Schalk.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. So I want to go ahead and talk to you about a case that you should be able to treat immediately in your practice tomorrow. It's fairly straightforward in a lot of the different aspects. Here it is. So this patient comes in and she's broken off her 1-1 and she wants a crown. Sorry, she wants an implant. She doesn't want a crown, she wants an implant because it's broken. She realizes she's been told before that there's not a lot of tooth structure left. The treating dentist looks at her bite though and realizes that she's biting right up into, not quite into the palate, but almost in the palate. And with this deep bite, it's not gonna be a very stable position for the implant. And this tooth also was a little bit retroclined before. And so in terms of the implant position, we want to go ahead and focus first on the lower incisors to correct that position. In terms of her bite, she's biting in a nice class 1 on her right side. Her left side, she's biting a little bit class 2, and she's got a small space between the teeth where she's lost a lower premolar before. Now, this is not the key of the case. I do not want you to focus too much on this. I want you to pay attention more to the correction of the deep bite, but I will go ahead and show you some interesting things that we did in this case that play in with the keys that we talked about before in terms of getting these teeth in the right spot. So we are first wanting to focus on intruding those lower incisors. Let's go to her first clean check. When we look at the lower incisors, we can see that they sit higher up in terms of her curve of speed, which you can't see my mouse again for whatever reason, but the lower incisors are sitting a little bit higher up than the canine, which is higher up than the first premolars. Same thing on the other side. You can really see it on this side, how it steps up. And so the goal of our treatment is we really want to go ahead and we want to intrude those lower incisors. Now, we talked about the challenge of root movements. So an ideal position of where we might stop this plan, right, where we're actually stopping it here at tray number 50, is we're showing those teeth intrude down into a reverse curve of speed. Right? If you compare the position of the lower incisors and the canine, now they actually sit lower down. If we were to actually have them kind of in their ideal position where a line would finish the bite, it would be something like this. But we know root movements are very challenging. And so if we ask to stop in this position where it's just flat, realistically, we're not going to get as much as what we ask for. You almost always have to overdo your root movements. And so we actually, on purpose, show it intruding into essentially a lower slight open bite. Not open bite, I guess, with the uppers, but into a position where we're in reverse curve speed. We can see obviously that she's a significant bruxer, which again is why we are wanting to do the treatment here, because our concern is we do not want to be putting strong forces onto a brand new implant. Now, what you'll see is the last treatment plans I kind of showed you, I showed you the side of things where we make errors and we make mistakes. And now this one, I'm going to show you where we do things much better. So I want to go ahead and show you here the teeth on the lower left. Right, so all you really need to know, let's just break this down. If you're a more basic user, and let me, so you can see me again, here's your takeaways. Okay, you're a basic user and you're like, Steven, I don't know about all this complicated stuff. Just give it to me straight. What do I need to focus on? Well, all you need to focus on in terms of fixing this deep bite is that you need 4 mm horizontal attachments on your lower premolars and your canine. We got the same thing over here. And you need to go ahead and plan that you over-intrude those lower incisors because you have to overdo hard root movements. How would you go ahead and actually do that again? We talked about moving attachments on teeth. So let me go ahead and show you on this demo case. How you would do it is you would go ahead, you'd click on, let me show the right screen here so you can see all of it. You can't see my mouse, but you'd click on tooth. Then you'd go ahead and you'd click on the canine and incisors. I'm holding down the control key while I click on those teeth. That allows you to select more than one tooth. If you just click on one tooth and you don't hold anything down, you only can select one. So I'm clicking control, and then now I can click on the arrow and drag down all of these teeth and intrude them all at the same time. So that's how you go ahead and physically make the change yourself if that's what's needed. So not super challenging and not super difficult. So we over-intrude those teeth. So that's all you really need to know. That's the takeaway. Done, finished, go home, have a drink. You're able to go ahead and intrude these teeth and make space for the implant. The upper teeth are barely even moving at all. Now we talked about the lingual attachments, how I use them in the previous case. In this situation here, I just have essentially 3 mm to 4 mm horizontal attachments. They're kind of fancy on one. Remember our mustache from before? This is almost like the mustache version of a conventional attachment where I place two together because I'm working on the root position of this canine. I want the root to move distally. Now, I'll just tell you something again as a standard baseline. That's not necessarily something that I say you would have to do. It's not a huge common practice, although ironically, I picked 2 cases where I did this. But the other option would just be place a vertical attachment either on the lingual or a vertical attachment on the buccal. Those would both also be options for how you control the roots first and foremost. You don't need to jump right into using a mustache attachment here of putting those together. Okay, so again, keys, beginner level, you're just looking at one basic thing, intrusion, horizontal attachments on your premolars and canines to lock the tray into place. Intrude those teeth and overdo it a little bit. That's it. Oh, it's interesting, right? We talked, and here's the Pontic. So if I click Pontic, this will show her fake tooth. We did not extract this tooth immediately, and instead we just gave her a fake tooth in her tray. Now, people will say to me, well, Stephen, is it not kind of gross that you have patients when you do these lingual attachments, you actually have them eat what their trays in? And the answer to that is no, it's not really gross because patients get used to it. I did my own treatment with lingual attachments, my wife, my staff, over 700 cases. And I don't force patients to do it, but I give them the choice. The interesting thing is a patient like this, she is going to want to eat with her aligners in. Because does she want to go ahead walking around without having her trays in while she's eating food and she's got a big gap in her front teeth? Not a chance. She wants to wear them when she's eating. She does not want to take them out. And so what we do is we plan this Pontic. And what we can ask the technicians for is we can just ask them to give us the fake tooth, the Pontic tooth in the 1-1 position and make it symmetrical. Theoretically, you could ask this. And I think it is actually. It is symmetrical because you can see that little kind of blob on the tooth there. It might have just been a bit of static while we were scanning. It's not actually, I think, a real bump growing on her tooth. So you can see that we would have, I'll have to go back and check my instructions. We would have asked them just to give us the mirror image for this tooth. And that's going to make it look very aesthetic. Now, one of the important things is to make sure that the technicians do not change the shape of this tooth, because people ask all the time, do we use Pontic paint? Do we use wax in the trays? Or what do you do in order to give them a fake tooth? And it's very easy. All you do is you ask the technicians to give you the size and shape of this tooth and do not change it. It needs to stay the same size and shape, which you can't unfortunately do in every single case, but do not change the size or the shape of this tooth. Treat it like it's a natural tooth. And then all you do is you fill up that tooth with composite and you shade match it. You make it look really, really aesthetic by shade matching this to the other teeth. Fill it up with composite, cure it, not on the mouth, like don't put it on the teeth yet, just pump it in the tray, cure it, and then go ahead and adjust it like you would a temporary crown. You could also go ahead and treat this like it is a temporary crown and use bisacryl, right? And just fill it up with bisacryl and shade match it as well. The key though is just to make sure that patients understand that these are really expensive and hard to make, and you give them 2 of them, always give them 2, because if they lose one, you don't want them calling you at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night for another one. But you tell them that if they lose it, it costs $150 to get 2 new ones. That's going to make sure that patients don't lose them. Right? All they do then is when they take their trays in and out and they switch trays or whatever, they clean, they squeeze and they pinch, right? They pinch as they take their trays out they come, and then they go ahead and they clean everything, take the little fake tooth out, clean in their trays, put it back in. You could also, as an aside, you have to adjust it and grind it down a whole ton, but you could also use a denture tooth, fun fact. But then you would, if you're using a denture tooth, what you would do differently, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. You would go ahead and you'd actually put it in their mouth for the scan. You'd actually grind it down. So let's say they had a partial, it's a flipper. Just literally cut the tooth off, put it in their mouth, like kind of put it between their 2 teeth, use a little bit of ortho wax, tack it to the neighboring teeth, and then scan them with that tooth in place. Take it out, scan the bottom, scan the bite, and then that tooth will perfectly fit into their aligners. The only downside if you do that beforehand, now they don't have you cut the tooth off their partial when you're scanning them originally. So that one's a little bit more challenging. So that's why I usually do not use a denture tooth. I usually just use composite. When these patients are taking in and out their trays, make sure you tell them never to stand over top of the sink or a storm grate or anything like that, because if they take out their trays and they're over top of somewhere, the tooth falls out of the tray, it could fall into the sink or down a storm grate or whatever, and now they've lost their tooth. Since explaining to patients that there's a cost of $150 to make them 2 new ones, we almost never have a patient lose them. Back when we didn't do that, we didn't tell them any of those things, patients would come back after a week being like, I lost both of them already. So really important that they just understand that there's extra cost involved if they are, there's extra cost involved if they lose them. Okay, I want to go ahead and show one other thing here. Let's get rid of this Pontic, which is closing of this space. So we're looking to close the space between these teeth. The roots diverge, right? The roots in this situation here are going towards the, I guess this is a 6 and a 7. So the roots are going distally. And what did we talk about last time, right? What matters? Well, we want to create a full wrap of plastic around the tooth. So what we do is we go ahead and we create the full wrap of plastic by only moving that one tooth first. Then we go ahead and we move the second tooth. We're extruding these teeth because they start off a little bit more gingivally placed, so we want to level the curvus B. Now, I said actually that I fixed all my mistakes, but I didn't. I guess I can just show you that sometimes things work out even when it's not perfect. I should have left this with a little bit of space if I did this again, and I would have overdone the root movement, and that would have allowed me to then focus on cleaning things up in another batch of trays if needed. You can see we have 2 attachments on here to help with the, again, I'm not going to go through the attachments extensively right now, but I have a certain attachment protocol on here to really work on the root tip because Align does not have attachments that work on molars for root tip. There is none. So we've created our own attachment protocol here, and we have 50 aligners in total. So those are the situations going on. What we're going to focus on now is this is where, let me go ahead and show you her photos. This is where she first starts off. Significant deep bite. Again, don't worry about the molar teeth. I don't really care about anything right now in terms of those positions. I really only want you to focus on the deep bite correction. And so this is where she first starts off. And this is where she's at after her first batch of aligners. Right? Look at the intrusion that's occurred. It's significant. We have room now for us to actually do an implant on that tooth. Now she's getting restorative work done on the other anterior teeth because there's some recurrent decay. So that's why I'm not too worried about the position, the angulation of this lateral incisor. What's tricky is that the lingual attachments, we might go ahead and plan to use them on crowned teeth, but they don't always stay. Just because we want them to be there does not mean that they always want to stay there. And so one thing that you should know is anytime that you're working on crowned teeth, first of all, I really do not like putting attachments on the buccal of crowned teeth, because then when you remove them, if they have scratched or scuffed up crowns, they're looking straight at you to go ahead and make them look like they used to. But if it's on the lingual, it doesn't matter if the glazing is removed and it doesn't look as good as it previously did. So that's why we've tried to place the attachments initially here on the lingual side of those teeth. But if the attachments don't stay, this is where you know that sometimes we have to compromise a little bit. The only way we're going to get a lot of root tip in to move that tooth is with attachments. But if the attachments don't stay, then that makes it very challenging. But fortunately, we know that we're going to be doing restorative treatment, and that restorative treatment then is going to allow us to correct any angulations that are slightly off. So we can cheat a little bit here. If you look at the lower, in terms of closing up the spaces, this is where things matter less. It doesn't matter as much if these molars and premolars don't have the perfect ideal angulation of the roots. I mean, it's not bad, but it doesn't matter as much because we're closing the space. We're not trying to open space for an implant. So we distalize these teeth, or sorry, we try to mesialize the lower molars. This side here didn't really have anything going on. We just needed these attachments to help with the intrusion of the anteriors. You can see again that that second premolar that we had actually placed attachments on right here, 4mm rectangular attachments, it fell off. It's not here anymore. So again, I don't want you to think that you're like, I need to have everything exactly perfectly placed and ideally set up. Because in some cases here, even if we don't have as many attachments as we'd like to have on, then it doesn't make a difference. It didn't really matter. The movement still occurred. So at this point now, we're just essentially holding things over and waiting until she goes ahead and gets her restorative treatment done. I want to point out one thing with her ClinCheck still, which is interesting. I told you before about placing double stacked attachments. This is a situation like this is what a double stacked attachment actually looks like. So when you look at these lower premolars, you can see that there's actually two attachments stacked directly on top of one another. Now, did we need to do this? No, we didn't. This is overkill for what we're trying to accomplish here, because the intrusion of those lower incisors is not crazy significant. I normally reserve double stacked attachments for really hard root movements like root tip, or if we were working on a crossbite. So we have these double stacked attachments here, but we don't need them in this case. They did not contribute to our success, but you can actually see what that looks like now, right? It's just a very, very retentive attachment on the teeth. Okay, so this was treatment plan number 1. There's going to be a very, very keen-eyed observer who's going to see something here. And so I'm going to take one little pause to show kind of a very, I don't know, high-end concept that you probably have never seen before. I have a detachment, a button cutout right here. But you're going to say, well, Stephen, where's your other spot that you're hooking your elastics to? And the answer to that is I was actually trying something out, which has had varied success. I've seen it work. I've also had it not work. And so what we were actually doing here is that we were looking to actually use a Pontic tooth. So this Pontic tooth, just like we have a Pontic in the central incisor position, we're placing it and we're actually using the elastics and this Pontic to hook together. So what we actually do is on the lower, we're grabbing the elastic rubber band, or the patient is, and she's actually hooking it underneath this Pontic because there's no tooth there. It's just a fake tooth. So she hooks the elastic rubber band underneath the Pontic tooth. And so the elastic, where it actually sits, let me just draw this for you guys. Kelly, have you ever seen this done before?
Sorry, I'm typing to answer to a question. Seen an L? What are
No,
you doing?
so what I'm
Elastic?
doing is I'm doing an elastic here and I'm actually putting it, I don't have a button cutout or a slit on the lower. What I'm doing actually is I'm uh, I'm using the Pontic to hook the elastic to go underneath it.
The Pontic.
Yeah, so essentially what you do is we're hooking on. So when I'll draw this in pink too. You're hooking it onto the button here. You
Okay,
actually
got
hook it
that.
to go on behind and underneath the Pontic here.
Okay. Sorry,
And
your
what that
screen cuts
does,
off, so we can't really see the
oh
Pontic
shoot,
that
sorry
much. That's
guys.
why I was a little confused. I thought you made an undercut under that final attachment, which was also tricky.
Yeah. So no, what we actually do then is we use the Pontic. So first, if you think about where
Ah,
it first hooks on, it's the pink. So you kind of hook it onto the button, you go over top of that Pontic, and then it goes underneath it. And so essentially what's happening then is that the elastic is going underneath that Pontic tooth, and it's
okay.
pushing up right intimately tight against the distal of that 3-7.
Ah,
So
very
pros
good.
and cons, this is a Sean Holiday technique. Pros and
Hmm.
cons of this is that you don't then need to sacrifice any surface area of the plastic to hook
Yeah.
on your button. But the downside is that sometimes this Pontic then can be irritating and rub against the cheek
Hmm.
or against the kind of retromolar area. And so, or the buccal shelf, whatever, both of those spots. And so this patient, eventually we did actually have to cut off the majority of the Pontic. So what we actually did then is we went ahead and we cut off the distal half of the Pontic. So you don't need the whole thing
Okay.
really.
Yeah.
So we just kind of cut it like this. So this is now gone. And then this just gives something again for a little surface area for it to hook onto, to again help pull these molars mesially.
That's a
So
good trick. And then, yeah, there's nothing to follow. Hey, did you have to ask for specifically for that Pontic? Because
totally.
oftentimes, yeah.
Yes, yes. So in the instructions, let me see if I have it here. Um, so actually for the doctors before, when I was mentioning this, I had said, please make the 1-1 Pontic the same size as the 2-1. You guys will see the exact same things popping up again and again. Again, now at this point, we didn't even talk about this, but we actually have essentially a protocol that's created an engine that's for Clearly Select doctors that actually programs almost all of these more complicated things into it. There's still responsibility and the need to jump in and take control of the ClinCheck when this comes back. But we actually have a specific engine that's created to help reduce the amount of work required to set up these plans. Like this is how comprehensive I am when I set
Hmm.
these up with the text. But you guys will, if you're in Clearly Select, you'll have access to our engine and a lot of other kind of cool features that will allow you to effectively move through these ClinChecks. So you'll see, please make space for the 1-1 Pontic or make the 1-1 Pontic the exact same size as the 2-1 Pontic. Same thing as before. Please sign with your name. Again, they can't do that nowadays. Do not use the Galler engine and do not allow collisions between teeth during movement. Some IPR instructions. Now I started off with just a regular button cutout, but that's where I changed this later. And here's my AP corrections that I asked. Please mesialize the 3-6 first to close the space from the 3-5, then mesialize the 3-7 once the 3-6 has done its movements. For the deep bite section, please show a reverse curve of speed by intruding the lower incisors 2 to 3 millimeters below the occlusal plane, while also extruding the lower premolars and first molars. And then this was what I had asked them for the thicker attachments on the lower. Please place double thickness 4 millimeter I usually call them double stacked attachments on the 3, 4, 4, 4, 4, 5, and then place a 4 millimeter horizontal attachment on the 4, 3, and 3, 3. So, and we talked previously about the over treatment, where someone was asking me about over treating to get the correct interincisal angle correct. So I've asked for them to over treat the palatal root torque in the anteriors here by 10 degrees on the upper incisors. And then we mentioned this already at the end of treatment, please give us 5. Oh, sorry guys, I wasn't showing you the palatal root torque there. Here's the palatal root torque. All right, fixing the interincisal angulation of those incisors. And then at the very end, on the bottom, you'll see when I'm sliding here, these last 5 trays, these are passive aligners that don't move the teeth at all. They're just there to hold over the patient while we're getting new trays. Okay, so this was pretty fortunate because it's not often that you get a hole-in-one in golf, or nearly, but that's pretty much what we ended up doing is we went through this first clin check, we essentially had good movements, and where we're at then is things are very, very close to where they need to be. The bite is slightly propped open because there are lingual attachments, like on this canine here, where they're actually hitting. So it's not quite as open as what it looks like, because when you take off the attachments, the bite will close a little bit more. So that's essentially where we're at. And then this patient goes ahead, they get their implant done. So here's what it looks like once the implant is complete. In the meantime, she actually chipped her lower crown. Now, one more thing keen-eye observers might notice is that this tooth is also a crown, of course, this lower first molar. And so you might be asking me, like, Stephen, you went ahead and you put all these different attachments onto your lower first molar and second molar, which at least one of them was a crown. How do you do that? And the main way that you can bond to crowns is you use hydrofluoric etch. And so you use hydrofluoric etch on the tooth first. Then you would go ahead and use monobond, which is a bonding agent. And then you go ahead and do your regular bond with whatever you use. And then you go ahead and put your composite on just like you normally would. So it's hydrofluoric etch that allows you to roughen up the surface of the tooth. You can also use, if you have like a sandblaster or like a prep start or whatever, something that goes ahead and just roughens up the tooth surface of these crowns will allow there to be a better bonding potential. But it is possible, like we mentioned, that things just do not want to bond to crowns. There's no guarantee that it will behave and work properly. But this is something that the patient needs to be aware of. One bonding agent that's really good, if you're like, well, what bond do you use? The bond that I think is the best, and I think Kelly also uses this clinically as her kind of preference when it comes to like bonding to crowns, for sure for me. I don't use it for the other stuff, but I use it for crowns, would be bonding with Assure, A-S-S-U-R-E, Assure Plus. That's what you use, right, Kelly?
Yep, from Reliance.
From Reliance, yes. Do you mind just throwing that in the chat for everybody?
Sure, yep.
So, okay, so I mean, again, pretty straightforward here. Let me go back to the pics. Right where we're at our final position, she has chipped her crown. We do need to go ahead and redo that crown now. But all in all, we now have a much better occlusion for these the implant. And obviously it gives us improved longevity, improved aesthetics, and it's a much more ideal situation than where she first started with her bite. And it's not a super challenging case. Again, I showed all those little Easter eggs and pearls for those who are kind of watching and checking this out, who kind of wanted to see how we closed up that space, again, other than the chip that happened. But if you are a newer provider and you had one thing to take away from this, it's 4 millimeter horizontal attachments on the premolars and canines, over intrude those incisor teeth, and I never showed this here, but potentially slow down the velocity because it's a root movement. Do not have them do it quite as quickly as they normally would. Instead, I would look to have them do 0.2 millimeters or maybe even 0.15 millimeters of intrusion. If you want to go ahead and list off any questions here.
Right. So the first one is, time permitting, can you talk a bit more about sequential mesialization of the LL molars in this case? I was under the impression that this is not a super predictable movement in the absence of TAS. How can you help this to express?
Sure. I guess it's a great question. You guys are always on point. You're not wrong in the sense that the predictability of having just the molars shift forward is challenging. So it is not a challenge necessarily in this situation to move forward those molars a small amount to close that extraction space. Like that, doable for sure. The challenge is how do you not have movement occur on the anterior teeth, right? Because as we push forward those molars, there is going to be some changes that happen to our incisors. And I will show you that here at the original position. This patient's midlines are almost on, right? They're very good. As we move those molars forward and close that space, what you will notice is that the midline now has shifted about 2 millimeters towards that extraction space, right? We probably closed a 3 millimeter space. But as we did that, the lower incisors actually moved. I'm gonna look at the final one here. They probably moved about 2 millimeters of the 3 millimeters. So even though it shows the molars only exclusively moving forward, that's not actually what happened. And so going back to Richard Litt's comments that orthodontics should be called compromisadontics and treat adult patients realistically, whereas you treat growing patients idealistically, it was something we were okay accepting, knowing that even though it's showing all these teeth moving forward, it is realistically not going to fully happen. And part of the reason why the midline shifted too is because the patient was irritated by this Pontic, the version we tried to do, that she wasn't as consistent with wearing her elastics as we wanted her to be. If I were doing this again, I would really, really, really reinforce to the patient how important the class 2 elastics are, because we're trying to drag forward these molars into that space. But in terms of the sequential mesialization itself and the movements, I mean, you can do full-on extraction cases and move teeth forward 6 millimeters. You could theoretically even move a tooth forward from a second molar into a first molar position, moving it 10 millimeters. The key is just going to be that it is a challenging movement and it might take time and many batches of trays like we saw in that first case. So just because I'm giving you the flip side version now, where I'm showing you how easy this one went, does not mean that it's always going to be that way. Because although it wasn't a sequential mesialization in that first case, it was a mesialization of a tooth and a root that took a really long time and was challenging to occur. So you're not wrong. It's challenging. It's just if you have slowed down movements, break up the plastic around the tooth so that you have full wrap of plastic. And then again, if I was doing it again, I would not close the plastic wrap around the mesial of this molar. I would instead go ahead and get it so we almost had the exact same thing on both sides, and then I'd finish it later. But again, it shows that sometimes if you even don't do things kind of as, you don't always have to lay up in golf. Sometimes you can go right for the pin and you don't land in the water, but sometimes you do land in the water. So I usually run this a bit more conservatively now. Hey, Chris, do you want to go ahead? I know there's always lots of questions about Clearly Select.
Yeah, for
In
sure.
terms
I
of
think,
Clearly Select.
well, I think you mentioned Clearly Select. So Clearly Select, obviously, this is our exclusive Invisalign Growth Network. So it's a community of like-minded dentists that are focused on comprehensive ortho education, but also practice growth. The key elements really are to provide extensive education to our members, increase that knowledge, increase the ability to expand scope of practice, as well as increase your confidence to do cases. Have the motivation to implement those changes in your practice so that you can achieve the goals that you're looking for, and ultimately have the accountability. We've developed an amazing group of dentists across Canada and the US. Right now, we're at about 200 practices in North America. As we mentioned before, it is an exclusive group. We want to have, dentists that fit the mold of the doctors that are looking to educate and grow their practices. We did put some information on our website, as well as in the chat. You can go and take a look at the chat. There is a link there that will take you to a landing page on clearlyalign.ca that will give you some of the information. But if this sounds like you in terms of, the type of dentist that would fit Clearly Select, then you can fill out the application form and one of our team members will reach out and set up an info meeting for you. On top of having a wealth of education with our group and the education that we provide, we've been able to secure a number of different contracts and partnerships with a lot of companies, one being Align. So we have some significant financial advantages for our members as well. One of the things that we're pretty proud of over the last quarter, we've seen some tremendous growth with our whole group. We're actually growing at 55% quarter over quarter right now. So tremendous growth, and I think a lot of that stems back.
Just to clarify for those who are wondering, the 55% means that doctors in our group who across the entire group, that means that they've increased the number of cases that they're doing by 55% individually. The majority of doctors, I would say, there's always the ones that don't grow as much, but I would say, Chris, and you have the numbers to back this up too, that the doctors who are committed and dedicated in the group, they're probably growing at over 100%.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point to make that we have a wide range of experience. We have some doctors that are just starting on their Invisalign journey and starting to do a few cases, and we see tremendous growth. They're usually 1,000% growth with those doctors because we have the support. One of the things that we offer is ClinCheck support. Kelly leads the team that provides the ClinCheck reviews, and we provide videos so that you can learn as you're doing live cases. But we also have doctors that are Diamond Plus providers, doing 400 cases. So I think the community itself and the engagement that we have, where there's no judgment, everybody can share and collaborate and learn from each other, has been phenomenal. So if you do want to learn a little bit more about Clearly Select, click the link in the chat or just go to clearlyalign.ca. At the top of the page, there's a link that says Join Clearly Select. You'll get some more information. You can fill out the form, and then we can have a more in-depth conversation to see if it's a fit for you and if you are fit for the group as well.
Well, thanks, Chris. There's 5 goals of what we really want to accomplish with Clearly Select. So again, we want to be the best clear aligner support group and educational platform in the world for general dentists. The 5 goals of what we're really trying to accomplish is, and this is what I think are needed to be successful. So number 1 would be knowledge. That's education. So that's all the content that we're providing, right? Over 180 hours worth of CE. Number 2 is the confidence. And again, this knowledge gets provided by like the live courses that you're seeing there that are recorded, or live in-person courses that you can come to, like our Clearly Illuminate conference. That's going to be an exclusive conference only available to those in the Clearly Select group. So then there's the confidence, which is us helping out on those 10 ClinChecks and actually planning them for you. So you take on cases you otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable with. And we'll create videos just like I'm doing right now to explain all the different changes we would make compared to what the standard protocols are with Align. Then number 3 is motivation. You need to have a community, a group that helps keep you in check and supports you. Number 4 would be the implementation, right? Focusing in on the discounts, the business support, giving you all of the protocols that we use in my own office laid out on a platter for you, so you can just start using them and you don't have to try and create all of this from scratch. And then the last one, being completely honest, is, like Chris said, accountability. We will work with you to create a plan of what your goal is and help you stick to it. And Clearly Select is not for everybody. There's expectations of being a member of this group. So we do expect that doctors are committed to learning and growing and working together in this community. Again, I think the lifestyle benefits of doing clear aligners is unbelievable. Don't have time to go into all that, but it's just a phenomenal group. And again, there's a huge range of doctors from brand new all the way through to extremely advanced doctors. But if it's something you'd like to know more about, then as Chris mentioned, we have the link available.